Hey everyone, welcome back to Gen X Marks the Spot. Um, I got a few notifications from a few of you about this clip. It's a clip of a larger show from the Tucker Carlson podcast on the Tucker Carlson Network channel that where he is interviewing a historian by the name of Daryl Cooper, who runs the 𝗟𝗏𝗪 podcast along with another historian, where he had some pretty shocking things to say about Winston Churchill. This is not the whole interview. You can find the whole episode. I believe it's over 2 hours on YouTube. Just search for it. But I didn't want to react to the whole 2 hours because he does cover a lot of other things in there, from what I'm told. But I want to react to this. As everyone knows, if you watch this channel, you know I am a huge World War II buff. And I have playlists about World War II on my channel if you want to check that out. But it's something that I know quite a bit about. Now, I don't know this Daryl Cooper's qualifications. I assume he's probably a PhD. Historian, probably. I am not. I will tell you my qualifications right up front. I'm a huge student of history in that I read and devour anything I can on parts of history that interest me, namely medieval times, Southern history, the American Revolution, World War II, and World War I. I am a huge student of those areas. Now, academically, I do hold a postmaster's degree in education. I hold a master's in public administration with a concentration in political science. In my undergraduate, I have over 35 hours in history. It was one of my minors, and it is something that I absolutely love. So academically, I'm sure this guy has me beat, but from what I understand, he probably doesn't have me beat on knowledge of the actual subject matter. So I wanted to react to this. Let me know if you enjoy these types of videos. I would definitely be happy to continue doing them. But let's dive in, shall we?
I'm not English, so I don't have any weird motive in asking this, but how would you assess Winston Churchill?
I got in trouble with my podcast partner, 𝗥𝗲𝗹𝗃, one time because he's a New England Dutchman whose his family, it's near and dear to, they're Dutch, but very near and dear to their heart that Winston Churchill is a hero, right?
Well, everyone
thinks that. He really thinks that. And I told him that I think, and maybe I'm being a little hyperbolic, maybe, but I told him, maybe trying to provoke him a little bit, that I thought Churchill was the chief villain of the Second World War.
How? Let's just eliminate Mussolini and Hitler, and later on the Emperor Hirohito. Let's just eliminate all three of them. The fact that Churchill assumed office after World War II started. World War II started September 1st, 1939. The official start of it was with the invasion of Poland. England and France declared war on September 3rd, 1939. Churchill did not assume power until 1940, I believe, or 41. So the prime minister that you're looking for around that time would be Neville Chamberlain. But let's just ignore that. So you were already involved in a war when Winston Churchill took over. Now, if you want to go back in time to the end of World War I, where the Allies, that is France, the UK, Russia, not so much Russia, they kind of got taken out of the war, but France, the UK, the United States, handily defeated Germany and their allies, but they turned around, instead of helping Germany rebuild with memorable sanctions, they put ungodly sanctions on Germany and basically caused the collapse of their entire way of life and their economy, and basically caused the rise of very, very right-wing nationalist parties such as the Nazis. So you could very well blame the Allies as a whole, including the United States. Plus, there was also the issue of United States banks loaning Germany money to turn around and pay the reparation payments to the United States, and then jacking up the interest. So there was a lot of stuff there that you could place on the Allies as having caused World War II or setting the stage for it, but not Winston Churchill. I mean, his family goes all the way back to Queen Anne of England. Yeah, his family's got some pull, but I don't think he was the cause or the villain of World War II. I don't think Hitler and Mussolini needed any help with that. But continue.
He didn't kill the most people. He didn't commit the most atrocities. But I believe, and I think when you really get into it and tell the story right and don't leave anything out, you see that he was primarily responsible for that war becoming what it did, becoming something other than an invasion of Poland. Or just, I mean, at every step of the way, like people are very often, I find, surprised to learn. There's a two-step process.
Well,
right?
why don't you just make the case for that? Okay, so you've made your statement. A lot of people are thinking, well, wait a second. You just said Churchill, my childhood hero, the guy with the cigar.
Yeah. Well, and the next thought that comes into their head is that, oh, you're saying Churchill was the chief villain, therefore his enemies, Adolf Hitler and so forth, were
Stalin,
the protagonists, right?
Yeah.
They're the good guys if you think he's a villain. That's not the case. That's not what I'm saying. Germany, look, they put themselves into a position, and Adolf Hitler is chiefly responsible for this, but his whole regime is responsible for it, that when they went into
there was no regime without Hitler. Hitler was the regime. You're almost using the same argument that the Nazi leaders at Nuremberg used, just following orders. No, Hitler was the regime. There was no regime without Hitler. You weren't part of the regime unless you did exactly what Hitler wanted you to do. It's kind of like the saviors in The Walking Dead. I am Negan. Same thing. If you were an SS member.
East in 1941, they launched a war where they were completely unprepared to deal with the millions and millions of prisoners of war, of local political prisoners and so forth that they were going to have to handle. They went in with no plan for that. And they just threw these people into camps, and millions of people ended up dead there. You have like letters as early as July, August 1941 from commandants of these makeshift camps that they're setting up for these millions of people who are surrendering or people they're rounding up. And so it's 2 months after, a month or two after 𝗙𝗵𝗁 was launched. And they're
what he's referring to is Operation Barbarossa, which was Hitler's invasion of the Soviet Union, or the USSR. Basically, you had the USSR and Germany signing, I believe it was the Pact of Steel, where they had promised to not aggress upon each other and to essentially carve up Eastern Europe and eventually all of Europe between them. So, Stalin actually was going to invade Poland from the east. So, yeah, Stalin is definitely a villain too. But then you had Hitler suddenly deciding to abort his original plan of conquering the UK and France first, then dealing with Russia. He suddenly pivoted, decided he was going to deal with Russia first, and invaded Russia. So that's what he's referring to. Also, I hate to but bless his heart, what's with all the hand movements? What is that? I mean, if it's a tick, I apologize, but I don't know if you're nervous and you're just trying to make a point. I talk with my hands too, but the way you're flailing about, I'm not even sure if you believe what you're saying. Anyway.
Writing back to the high command in Berlin saying, we can't feed these people. We don't have the food to feed these people. And one of them actually says, rather than wait for them all to slowly starve this winter, wouldn't it be more humane to just finish them off quickly now?
So you're saying that the mass murder of Jews, gypsies, homosexuals, Slavs, and anyone that pretty much said or did anything contrary to Hitler's wishes in the conquered territories, Poland, Soviet Union, was a humanitarian effort? We don't have the money to feed them. We can't feed them, so let's just kill them. Is that what you're saying? The systematic killing of people Hitler did not like started all the way back when he actually took power as chancellor in 1933. There were the vans that used to go around and pretty much gas people that had physical and mental handicaps, as well as political prisoners. There were already concentration camps in Germany long before they were built in Poland. So they didn't start doing the extreme mass factory operation that we coincide with the Holocaust until after 1942, after the famous conference that I've covered, where they actually discussed their plan. That started much later, but to say that that didn't start until then, that the concept of eliminating ones, I mean, there were German death squads along with the invading troops that would just slaughter whole villages. They would have them dig their graves themselves, shoot them, and then have them fall in, and they would just dump dirt over them. So this stuff is well documented. That is not a humanitarian thing. That was their plan. Hitler wanted living space. I can't remember the German term for it, but he wanted living space for his people. So that meant get rid of the people that were already there. He considered Eastern Europeans, even though they were Aryan or white, he didn't consider them along the same level as Germans. They were not Germanic. They were not Nordic. They were mongrels. He also considered United States and Canadians mongrels. He did not consider us on the same level as them. And I'm pretty sure he's probably going to address this. But Hitler did have a certain amount of admiration for the Brits because he considered them a little more on par with the Germans, and that he saw them as a type of puppet state that he could control without having to kill everyone in it. Of course, the Jews and anybody else that directly offended him would be eliminated, but he saw a way to kind of bring them around to his side and basically make it a puppet government. That was actually in his plans. His plan was world domination. He even had a plan for what he would do in North America. It's scary. But, yeah. So what you're saying is complete buckus. The elimination of as many people as they could to make space for Germans was their ultimate plan.
And so this is like 2 months into the invasion, right? And like my view on this, I argue with my Zionist interlocutors about this all the time with regard to the current war in Gaza. Look, man, like maybe you, as the Germans, you felt like you had to invade to the east. Maybe you thought,
and there it is. There it is. See this guy's colors right on his forehead. There it is.
That Stalin was such a threat, or that if he launched a surprise attack and seized the oil fields in Romania, that you would now not have the fuel to actually respond and you'd be crippled and all of Europe would be under threat, and whatever it was that like maybe you thought you had to do that. But at the end of the day, you launched that war with no plan to care for the millions and millions of civilians and prisoners of war that were going to come under your control. And millions of people died because of that, right? And you can look at it and say like, So get back to your main question. Please. About Churchill. If you go to 1939,
just lectured us about the Middle East for 2 minutes.
When the Germans and the Soviet Union invade Poland, as soon as that war's wrapped up on the German side, Hitler starts firing off peace proposals to Britain and France because they had already declared war. He didn't expect them to declare war, actually. Like there's a famous scene where he kind of throws a fit when he finds out that they did do that. And so he doesn't want to fight France. He doesn't want to fight Britain. He feels that's going to weaken Europe.
What are you smoking? He fully planned to invade France and England. That was like his original phase 1, and then for some reason he pivoted. What are you smoking?
When we've got this huge threat to the east, the communist threat over there.
He had a pact with them. He had already taken Stalin diplomatically off the board, at least until he did what he had to do in the West, and then they could fight it out. Hitler just wanted all that territory and the resources and everything, the oil and the gas and everything that you're just, ugh.
And he starts firing off peace proposals. He says, let's not do.
Hi, I'm JT, and I made Result Hunter, the search engine for conservatives. Let me just tell you what it does. First of all, big tech right now is running.
Not do this. Like, we can't do this. And of course, you know, a year goes by, 1940 comes around, and they're still at war. And so he launches his invasion to the West, takes over France, takes over Western and Northern Europe. Once that's done, the British have, escaped at Dunkirk. There's no British force left on the continent. There's no opposing force left on the continent. In other words, the war is over, and the Germans won. Okay,
But by what point?
Fall of 1940, right? So there's literally no opposing force on the continent. And throughout that summer, Adolf Hitler is firing off radio broadcasts, giving speeches, literally sending planes over to drop leaflets over London and other British cities, trying to get the message to these people that Germany does not want to fight you.
Yes, he may have been doing that, but it was going back to what I said before. He wanted to make them a puppet government. He was also doing propaganda through what I call chess pieces here in the United States. You know, like Lindbergh. Lindbergh was a huge isolationist and a supporter of what was going on in with Germany, as well as Henry Ford. There were lots of bad apples over here too, and he was hoping that eventually he could probably sway a significant portion of the population where it would be more of a diplomatic invasion. He may not have wanted to shoot at them, but he wanted to take them over. And what you're talking about is appeasement. Just surrender. No more fighting. You wanted England just to roll over. Neville Chamberlain tried that. He appeased Hitler twice with when he annexed Austria, and also when he took over the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia. There was a Treaty of Munich, which said, okay, we're going to give you this, but you won't take any more. No. Churchill knew what an evil he was facing. There was no appeasing Hitler until Hitler controlled the entire world. And if the UK had not stood, well, we might all be speaking German today, and you certainly wouldn't be on YouTube because it wouldn't be allowed. So there you go. I maybe you could say that, okay, Churchill could have avoided more of a shooting war if he had just surrendered, but that could be said for anybody that surrenders in war, and that's absolutely bullshit.
Like, we don't want to fight you. Offering peace proposals that, it said, you keep all your overseas colonies. We don't want any of that. We want Britain to be strong. The world needs Britain to be strong, especially as we face this communist threat and so forth. Like, this is what's going on. And I think that if there were people in Britain who, if they hadn't put it this way, if they hadn't been so successful at delegitimizing the peace approach by demonizing Neville Chamberlain and so forth, and holding him responsible for the invasion of Poland, that people would have been, they would have understood, like, we don't need a repeat of the First World War. We don't, which is not what ended up happening, but that's what everybody thought was going to happen. And so Churchill, you have a guy, Churchill wanted a war. He wanted to fight Germany. And
he wanted a free, independent Britain, and to have that, he had to fight Hitler. Hitler wasn't going to back off. Hitler would have turned the UK into a puppet state. I don't know what you're talking about. There would have been no free, independent Britain without fighting Hitler.
The reason that I don't begrudge him that, people can, national leaders, you can fight whoever you want. If you feel like your the long-term interests of the British Empire are threatened by the rise of a powerful continental power like Germany, and you need to check that those are.
You're saying the Nazis weren't a threat to the entire world? You obviously don't know this time period.
Great power games, and you play them the way you feel like you need to play them. That's fine. The reason I resent Churchill so much for it is that he kept this war going when he had no way. He had no way to go back and fight this war. All he had were bombers. He was literally, by 1940, sending bomber fleets to go firebomb the Black Forest, just to burn down sections of the Black Forest. Just rank terrorism, going through and starting to, what eventually became just the carpet bombing, the saturation bombing of civilian neighborhoods. To kill is the purpose of war.
Do I need to teach you a master class on how successful guerrilla warfare can be when needed? Churchill used what he had, and his plan all along was to hopefully bring the United States and Canada into the war, mainly the United States. He was constantly talking with FDR and trying to bring the United States into the war. At that time, all the United States was providing was munitions and weapons, kind of like we're doing for Ukraine right now. But he wanted active involvement. He knew that he couldn't beat them by himself. He needed to bring the United States, and then he knew Canada would soon to follow, into the war. And, that was eventually successful because Japan jumped the shark on that. But he used what he had to use, and that was very effective warfare. It made the German people know, hey, people aren't just rolling over. We're going to have to pay a price for that. And if you can turn the people against their leaders, you have a chance to help to destabilize the government and help win the war. So putting fear into the hearts of the civilians, as cruel as it may sound, it was war. But he knew without that, his people were as good as being enslaved. He did what he had to do. And I feel bad for the German and the British civilians of the day. Anywhere war's going on, I feel bad for the civilians because they're often treated as pawns. But he did what he had to do.
Which was to kill as many civilians as possible. And all the men were out in the field. All the fighting age men were out in the field. And so this is old people, it's women and children, and they knew that. And they were wiping these places out. It was as gigantic scaled terrorist attacks.
He's pretty much, I think, trying to equate this with what's going on in Gaza right now. And I don't want to get into all that. I am pro-Israel. I do feel bad for all civilians in that area. But Israel's fighting the war that they have to fight with the type of people that they're fighting, just like Churchill had to do. So, and it's fine for somebody here in the West, like him, particularly here in North America. We've never faced an active invasion in our lives, and I hope and pray we never do. So it's easy for this guy to sit there and judge what Churchill had to do based on what he's looking at today. 1940s Europe was much different than it is today. There was a lot of sentiment in the UK wanted to fight. It wasn't like he was forcibly putting his people into war. They knew they had to fight to maintain their culture and their way of life. It's called nationalism, and there's a healthy level of it. And so, as much as I hate the idea of civilians being killed, he had to let them know he was there and buy time to bring in allies.
It's the greatest, scale of terrorist attacks you've ever seen in world history.
Why would he do that?
Because it was the only means that they had to continue fighting at the time. They didn't have the ability to reinvade Europe. And so he needed to keep this war going until he accomplished what he hoped to accomplish. We know now there's actually a really great series of books. It's one of the best. I recommend it to everybody, but it's really expensive now. And it's 6 long volumes called History of British Special Operations in the Second World War. And one of the books gets into the level of just the extent of media operations, propaganda operations, everything that they were running in the United States to eventually drag us into that war. And that was his whole plan. His whole plan was we don't have a way to fight this war ourselves. This war is over. We need either the Soviet Union or the United States to do it for us. And that was the plan, and kept the war going long enough for that plan to come to fruition. And to me, it's a craven.
So the only alternative then is to have the Nazis control the world, because they weren't going to stop with Europe. A lot of what you're talking about hinges on the fact that you can believe what Hitler says, and you can't. UK would have been conquered diplomatically. It would have been a puppet state, and they would have continued all across Europe, Spain was already a fascist country. Italy, they eventually did invade Greece. The Balkans would have been gone. They would have continued their jaunt into Africa, and eventually they would have either had a stalemate with us over here in North and South America, or they would have eventually launched an invasion over here too, or the same kind of propaganda war that you're talking about until they eventually flipped idiots here to their side. And it would have been a Nazi world, and I didn't want that. You didn't want that. I don't want that. No one alive that's got a brain in their head would want that. Certainly not Churchill. He did what he had to do to protect his country and protect the world.
Ugly way to fight a war. And
what was the motive?
There's a growing interest in socialism among young people in America, but do they know about its dismal past and history of failure?
Well, Churchill's got a long and complicated history. I mean, he's somebody who
that was the wryest smile I think I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Push back.
Well, look, I think on one level, there was a sense that Churchill was sort of humiliated by his performance in the First World War as the head of the Admiralty, and he was out in the cold for a long time.
I mean, Gallipoli.
Yeah, and which that was his operation.
Yeah,
and so he was rightly held responsible for that and seen as responsible for one of the great disasters that the British suffered during that war. And so I think part of it was probably kind of personal. He wanted redemption. He wanted to go out there and prove that he's the warlord, that they can go out there and fight this big war. Probably. I think part of it, I read about Churchill and he strikes me as a psychopath. But he's also a sort of, he was a drunk. He was very.
Lots of great leaders are psychopaths. You could find any number of stuff wrong with any great leader, Alexander the Great, for example. But at least he was our psychopath, and he wasn't trying to eliminate people on the scale of Hitler. People are human. There's no black or white. There's evil and there's good. But then everything in the middle is a shade of gray, and I'm glad Churchill was on our side.
Very childish and strange.
And you should be too. As my British friends would say, you twat.
Strange ways. People would talk about how, as an adult, as prime minister, they'd find him in his room and he's playing with action figures like war toys and army men.
Sounds like somebody that's trying to. I used to play with little soldiers too when I took military history in college. You better believe it. So I have hobbies that a lot of people would consider childish. I'm sure you do too.
And stuff, and would get mad when people would interrupt him. When he was doing this. This is a strange fellow. There's all those things. But then you get into why was Winston Churchill such a dedicated booster of Zionism from early on in his life, right?
Again, here we go. This guy is obviously so infuriated about what's going on in the Middle East right now. He's using it to attack Churchill to make a point.
And there's ideological reasons. In 1920, he wrote a kind of infamous now article called Zionism versus Bolshevism. And he basically makes the case that, which was true to a large extent, that all of Eastern Europe, the Pale of Settlement, which is where the vast majority of Jews lived, other than the United States, which is where a lot of them had traveled to, that area had become so engulfed by a revolutionary spirit that all the young Ashkenazi Jews who were over there were getting swept up into it. It was the 60s here on steroids, right? And in a much more serious and ended up being destructive way. And this is 1920, so this is shortly after the Bolshevik Revolution. Basically, the point of his paper is he says these people who are over there, they're all going one direction or the other. They're going to be Bolsheviks. They're going to be Zionists. We want them to be Zionists, and so we need to support this. And so that was early on. There was an ideological component of it. But then.
And stopping communism / giving the Jews a country of their own is bad. Why?
as time goes on, you read stories about Churchill going bankrupt and needing money.
Okay, I'm going to stop because he's just going to get into nitpicking. Love to see what he would say about any number of leaders I could mention. Anyway, yeah, this guy has an agenda. He's definitely spouting some revisionist history there, putting his spin on it. And let me know what you think down below. And if you enjoyed this kind of content, let me know. I'll be back with some more. And thank you so much for everything. Until next time. Tracy.